The new moon in Libra begins a cycle in which you may find yourself having to move forward even as the goalposts shift and descend further into the uncanny valley between the world we once knew and the one beginning to displace it. As Neptune ingresses back into Pisces and a running grand water trine between Saturn and Pisces, Jupiter and Cancer, and the remaining 5 traditional visible planets begins to form, we may feel ourselves pulled to return to familiar patterns and ways of being which, the second we try to hold on to them, seem to slip through our fingers, and each of us in our own way will have to come to terms with a world that will never be the same. I'm Kyle Pierce, this is the Astrology channel, and today we're going to be discussing the new moon in Libra and some of the more impactful astrology that is going to carry us through to the end of October and into November of 2025. Also, if you entered our recent raffle for a free reading in celebration of the Astrology channel's recent achievement of 1,000 subscribers, then stay tuned because I will be announcing the winner of the raffle later on in this video. And with that, let's dive into the new moon in Libra. All right, so the new moon in Libra. In Libra, we're always dealing with, on some level, this idea of balance, of equilibrium. We're asking the question, are things balanced? Are things in equilibrium? Are they equitable? Is what's happening fair? I'm looking at this and I'm looking at this. Are they in harmony? Are they in disharmony? How do we deal with things given the state of harmony or equilibrium that may or may not even be there? Just because we're in Libra doesn't mean that the balance is actually there. We're just concerned with the topic. Now, as we move further along in Libra, things potentially get more complicated. You become maybe less concerned about this ideal of equity, fairness, balance, equilibrium, and it becomes more necessary to square it with what is actually going on. Remember that Libra is a sign ruled by Venus, right? Our Lady of Love and Beauty, but it is also the sign where Saturn has its exaltation. It's the sign where Saturn is kind of a specialist, which adds a little bit more of a severe tone to Libra, especially as we get deeper into Libra, closer to Saturn's degree of exaltation, which is 20-21 degrees Libra. But in the last third of Libra, where this new moon is taking place, the idea of maybe harmony or beauty or balance becomes less like the haircut that everybody was getting in the 1950s and more like Edward Scissorhands hairstyle, which, if you've seen the movie Edward Scissorhands, which I would assume you have, he creates these like very funky hairstyles that are often maybe asymmetrical. There's, a bunch of hair up here and, this side is shaved, or we shaved it down the middle and then we create these little spiky things. Like it's accepting and even incorporating extremity or deviations from the norm, or even imbalance or asymmetry into the formula for balance that we're seeking. Those haircuts were not always symmetrical, but they were geometrically and aesthetically coherent. So when we're thinking about this new moon in Libra and the kind of seed that we're planting, or that is being planted, it's one which takes into account and even incorporates this kind of idea of asymmetry or how to find balance in kind of a funky situation, as we're maybe coming off of the panic and reactivity of the full moon in Aries, and even before that, adjusting to the new landscape post September 2025 eclipse season, where maybe some of the essential support structures snapped or began to sag, and the foundation is now a little lopsided. It's a little bit like a like a Nightmare Before Christmas style dwelling where, it's curved into the right and distorted, but somehow sound structure which incorporates this element of the extreme or of the abnormal or the wild or the whimsical. Or maybe for a lot of us, the house hasn't fallen over, but the ceiling is beginning to sag, or there's a big hole in the floor. How do we adjust things around that new state of the structure in order to exist in a sort of harmony with it? This place where the new moon is occurring represents a slice of the zodiac with kind of a weird history. In fact, the second half of Libra, from about 15 degrees of Libra to the end of the sign. And then the first half of Scorpio has historically been referred to as the Via Combusta, or the fiery way, and was thought to be, particularly by medieval astrologers, a rather perilous part of the zodiac. And much of this has to do with the fact that both the luminaries, the sun and moon, find their degrees of maximum fall within this part of the zodiac. Libra is the sign also of the sun's fall. The moon has its fall in Scorpio. These are rough places for the luminaries generally. So there's perhaps a sense with this new moon that it's not the most safe or comfortable place to plant seeds, right? Doesn't mean we can't. It just means that what it is that we are initiating, or what intention we are putting in the soil of the moment, if you will, may not be especially fertile, or may be subject to extreme weather, which may disrupt the expected growth pattern of what it is we're trying to bring into being here. I've been finding myself talking quite a bit about the third decan of Libra in particular, that last 10-degree slice. I've been finding myself talking about it in terms of at the beginning of The Empire Strikes Back, the second Star Wars movie, when I think Luke Skywalker shows up. Actually, that might be Return of the Jedi. I don't know. Luke Skywalker shows up to a bar on Tatooine, right? And it's this kind of wild, raucous bar. There's music playing. There's a bunch of shady characters hanging out. You got Jabba the Hutt eating snails or something, and is Princess Leia chained up in a leather bikini, right? Guido gets shot over a poker game or something. This is like a dangerous place where, there's fun and drinks. there's a party happening, but, it's a dangerous place. But if you know how to handle yourself, you might find it a fun place, or even a lucrative place where you can do business with some of these other figures operating on the fringe of the galaxy, right? This is kind of this is a bit of Libra 3, right? This is the side of Libra that knows how to handle itself in these kind of wild situations. But when you think about this slice of the zodiac being a no luminary zone, or a place where spirits and bodies can be corrupted easily, or shot over poker games, right? It's not necessarily somewhere you want to raise babies, right? This is it's not our first choice, but we manage, or we try to. So this is, maybe where we're planting the seed. We're planting the seed on Tatooine. You may have the intention for our business to go a certain way, but there are factors beyond our control, or we're in an environment that is shifting, right? And we may have to pivot to another plan or another approach just as things are getting off the ground. Suffice it to say, this new moon is one where you're going to be asked to plant seeds, plant intentions in an environment that is inherently unstable. Where we don't know where we're going to go, but we just kind of have to do that anyway, right? We still have to make plans. We still have to live our lives, even if the price of everything is slowly creeping up on us because of tariffs, or our, job outlook is uncertain because of changes in the supply chain and world trade agreements. And this, shifting environment offers us no certainty. However, we must proceed with a certain amount of grace, even, in order to not get shot at the bar in Tatooine, not literally, but, we may not find ourselves able to rest on our laurels, or feel a sense of security in material terms, or even in how we see our role in the world, right? The sun, the moon, body, right? So we have to rely on something else, on our cunning, our ability to adapt, or our hope that things will work out. Or we may just have to, eat some shit for a while. We just have to endure some hardship, or just the discomfort of not knowing what the future holds. Because this part of the zodiac, where the new moon is taking place, actually has dignity to offer to every other planet except for the sun and moon. I believe it's in Mars's bound or term. The third decan of Libra is ruled by Jupiter using the descending Chaldean order method, and by Mercury using the triplicity method. And then it's the exaltation of Saturn, and Venus rules the sign. But the moon and the sun are not naturally suited to the rules of the particular game that we are maybe finding ourselves in at this particular moment. Now, on the positive side, and there is one, this is otherwise a rather nicely situated new moon, because it is sharing a sign with Venus, in a sign ruled by Venus, So it has this support from Venus, which is one of the planets that, eases our way. It's a benefic planet. And then Jupiter is at the end of Cancer, looking upon this new moon via square, which, while the square is a tense aspect and it represents a sort of disagreement, Jupiter is a correcting and moderating influence, particularly in Cancer. So it is looking down its nose at the bar in Tatooine and saying, this is not safe. This is not up to code. That's a violation for sure. And while it may not be able to fix the situation, right, we may not be able to change our environment entirely, we can find ways to get what we need within it. And that is essentially at the heart of what this new moon's about, is how do we operate within this shifting dynamic or paradigm within the world, within our lives, in a way that's graceful, in a way that is, while certainly not without effort, doesn't entirely sap us of our strength, which may involve choosing carefully the degree to which we invest in uncertain things, and maybe not putting all our eggs in one basket, going all in on a bet that we are in no way certain of, because we might end up like Guido, right? Not literally, at least hopefully not. But hopefully you get the idea. There are shifting winds, and we don't even know that the port that we are trying to sail our ship to is going to be open, but we still have to choose a direction and be prepared to, adjust tack, I think, I'm using the sailing analogy properly, in order to adapt to wind that may not be at our backs, right where we want it. And that's okay. In fact, most of us aren't accustomed to maybe having the wind at our backs all the time. So it's not necessarily that dramatic for all of us. Some of us may be a little more well suited to that kind of dynamic than other people. And if you join me for the video, which will be published separately from this one, but around the same time, where we will cover the astrology around this new moon for each of the 12 signs of the zodiac, for your rising sign or for your sun sign, however you wish to apply it. We'll hopefully get a little more of a personalized idea of, how you might best navigate this new moon. But in general terms, this is kind of what the weather is. And regardless of whether it's natural to you or not, there is a degree of need to adapt to it. But there's also a lot of opportunity in this environment. Chaos is a ladder, right? With that, we shall move on from the new moon and talk about some of the other main astrological events, which are going to be very impactful and influential over the next couple weeks as we finish out the rest of October. So let's move on to that. On October 20th, 2025, Mercury will conjoin Mars in Scorpio. This is an aspect which really began forming on October 6th when Mercury entered Scorpio, and has really just been gaining in strength over the last 2 weeks or so, and will really continue to be influential throughout the rest of Mercury's time in Scorpio until it enters Sagittarius on October 29th. So there's something to consider always with Mercury, is that traditionally, Mercury has always been a bit of an outlier when it comes to the usual categories that we sort planets into. We have luminaries, the sun and moon. We have benefics, Venus and Jupiter. And we have malefics, Mars and Saturn. And then there's Mercury. And that tends to be the case for pretty much any rule that you apply to other planets. Mercury usually has one or two, if not more, caveats, or is in some way the exception to that rule. And that's because the role of Mercury, or we can think of that as describing a particular role that Mercury plays, which is the relayer of information, or the categorizer of information, the one that assigns categories and gives names and labels to other things, and therefore can't necessarily hold one itself. Suffice it to say that Mercury is neutral, or maybe more accurately, it is a product of whatever it has to say, or whatever information it's taking in. It is a bit like the hype man, or the little John, that echoes or reiterates, what's happening or what we're doing. It's communicating it. It's explaining it. So when Mercury joins with Mars, or is just hanging out with Mars, it's talking about what Mars is doing. It's talking about Mars things, Mars and Scorpio things. So it's bringing, our minds and awareness towards martial topics. There's likely to be communications about conflict, or communications which incite conflict, or words which are aimed to provoke, or which are intended to do damage, or even if not intended to do damage, may well end up doing damage. It's sometimes when we're harsh with people, they don't like us very much after. But this also, in a sense, sort of puts a megaphone in Mars's hands. So we're giving voice to anger, or we're seeing people who are angry or who have the intention of starting conflict or are actively engaged in conflict. We're hearing their voice, we're hearing them speak. And so you are likely to see more talk about the conflicts taking place in the world, about the simmering tensions, which would be there otherwise. But now that Mercury's there, we're talking about them, and we're hearing from the people that have the hostilities and the simmering tension, which has a way sometimes of stoking more tension in some cases, while in others, when we are able to address conflict verbally, we are sometimes able to find non-violent ways of resolving or ending those conflicts. Sometimes a few sharp words is enough to dissuade an opponent from engaging with us further, or we're able to engage in a conflict verbally and identify a victor without having to resort to physical violence. And I do think that there are some opportunities for this to be very productive. You may find it easier than usual to go really deep into a topic, or have conversations which really peel back the bark on the log and explore, all the little critters that are living and hiding underneath. This is very much an opportunity to give voice to the emotional undercurrent that we may be experiencing, just in our observations of the world or within our personal lives, which, can be tender spots, but sometimes it can be very helpful to address them in the open. What can be very helpful with Mercury and Mars together, especially when Mars is very well situated, very powerful, is that it can make the mind fearless, or more courageous, more willing to attack or delve into difficult topics. There are many things which most of us, if not all of us on some level, don't contemplate or prefer not to think about because it makes us uncomfortable, it makes us uneasy. And sometimes that avoidance of thinking about problems is what causes them to persist in our lives or in the world. And especially as both Mars and Mercury begin to approach this ongoing trine between Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Pisces, which is really going to be the defining aspect of the end of October and all the way through November and into December. And what we're going to see, starting with Mercury and shortly followed thereafter by Mars, is the beginning of this procession of planets activating this grand water trine, which I'm actually going to break down in a separate segment. All right, guys, we're taking a little break in the video in order to do our little raffle in celebration of 1,000 subscribers. At the end of the full moon in Aries video, I announced a raffle for one free reading for whoever entered the code word in the comments, and we got quite a few responders, and this is where we're going to find out who the lucky winner is. And for those of you who missed the competition, don't worry, I believe that there will most likely be other opportunities for this in the future. This may become a semi-regular thing, perhaps, because I really do appreciate those of you who tune in and support the channel, and it means a lot to me that you guys get something out of this. So let's do this. And actually, I'm going to mark the time. Of course I'm going to, because that's what astrologers do. But I'm also just very interested in seeing how the chart for the drawing of the winner of the reading lines up with the chart of the person whose name I draw. So let's find out. All right, got a little box here. Got everybody's name, or rather screen name, YouTube handle, whatever was on Spotify. That's what's on here. And if I draw your name, I'm gonna punch you down. So here we go. Shaking it up. All right. You see, possibly before you, box full of papers. not going to look. Pick it up, pick it up. And the winner is On the Summit. You guys can read that? On the Summit. Congratulations. You are the winner. I'm going to reach out to you. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find your email through YouTube, through the YouTube account, but hopefully if you're watching this, you'll see that you've been chosen. And you can also contact me at kylepierceastrologer@gmail.com. And yeah, I haven't really developed a process for this, but we'll figure it out. Congratulations on the summit. The rest of you, if you didn't win, that's okay. Better luck next time. There will be a next time. And thanks for participating. And oh yeah, the chart, I didn't read that part. The chart for the drawing. See, I drew the name at 11:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. While Cancer was rising, Jupiter's in the first house, like that. And yeah, we'll see how that lines up. So, all right, move on to the rest of the video. Now, on October 24th, Mercury in Scorpio will apply to a trine with Jupiter in Cancer, and then immediately begin applying to a trine with Saturn in Pisces, which it will complete on the following day, October 25th. And then on October 27th, Mars in Scorpio will complete a trine with Jupiter in Cancer, and then immediately begin applying to a trine with Saturn in Pisces, which will be exact on October 29th. And what this is essentially kicking off is a rather unique event, astrologically speaking, in which all 5 of the planets which are slower than Saturn and Jupiter, and also closer to the Sun, and also faster moving, the other 5 traditional planets that aren't Saturn and Jupiter, are all going to make at least one pass through this grand trine in the water signs, in Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. While Jupiter and Saturn are literally going to be holding it down, Jupiter is going to station retrograde at about 25 degrees of Cancer in November, and shortly after, Saturn is going to station direct at about 25 degrees of Pisces towards the end of November. And throughout that time, the Sun, Mars, Mercury, Venus, the Moon, they will all take turns completing this grand trine and essentially translating light between Jupiter and Saturn. Translation of light is essentially whenever a faster moving planet separates from an aspect from a slower moving planet and then applies to another slower moving planet. It, in a sense, carries the light from the previous aspect to the next aspect. So even though this Saturn-Jupiter trine becomes very close within minutes of perfecting, it never quite goes exact. So in a sense, the cycles of major social change, or the long-term evolution of larger social structures, which Saturn and Jupiter together signify, that collaborative program doesn't quite materialize in its full form, at least not without the help of all the other planets, or until all the other planets have had a say. And I think this is a rather fascinating event astrologically, especially when you consider the shift in paradigm that takes place throughout 2026, especially towards the end of 2026, where the emphasis becomes overwhelmingly slanted towards fire and air signs, or active diurnal signs, which is really going to be setting the stage for a very different period of time than the one that we've been living in for perhaps quite a long time indeed. When you consider the longer term Saturn-Jupiter cycle, which there is a cycle which takes place over the course of 200 years, where the Saturn and Jupiter conjunctions all take place in a single element. And for the last 200 years, starting roughly around the end of the Napoleonic Wars, until, well, around 1982, when we had the first conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in air signs, in Libra specifically, we were in an Earth age, an age of Earth based on this system for defining periods based on the Saturn-Jupiter cycle. And while that began to shift in the 80s, the first Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in air signs, which is when we started to see the beginning of the digital age, essentially, the information age. But it was interrupted with another Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus, in an Earth sign, in 2000? 2001, 2002, putting us in kind of a intermediary period between these two ages, until finally in 2020, the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius signaled the beginning of the age of air, which you may have already heard of. And these air ages, these 200-year periods where these conjunctions are taking place in air signs, are periods which have historically been less stable. They have been characterized by a lot of social change and often a conflict. The borders between peoples, nations, the things which Saturn and Jupiter together are responsible for, were much less fixed. They weren't static things, and they were subject to change, and a lot of and weren't, as easily defined, we'll say. So this shift that we really began to see in a more concrete way in 2020 towards a less centralized and stable world order, if you will, but was really, in a sense, kind of weighed down by the outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus all being in earth and water signs. The planets which have come to represent, broader social change since their discovery. The ideas, the invisible component, the truly alien and different ideas, which the outer planets tend to bring, weren't quite in sync with this air age quite yet. But in 2026, they will be. And that's when we're going to start to see the real change in direction, which is likely to not so much be a change in direction, but the beginning of a period where things start to change faster and they change direction often. And that just becomes part of the normal paradigm. And this grand trine taking place with all the visible planets in water signs seems like this kind of emotional send-off, if you will, or a period where the world as a whole perhaps is able to reflect on itself and its interconnectedness in a way that we may not see on a large scale for some time to come. And to pull apart this grand trine, I want to take a moment to just look at the relationship between the decans, the 10-degree subdivisions of each sign, which divide the signs into three. This grand trine, this grand water trine, will be taking place in the third decan of each of the water signs, Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio. And the relationship between these three decans all feed into each other in a way. The third decan of Cancer is about acquiring and having everything that you need. It's prosperity in the sense of having all your needs fulfilled and having a little bit of extra to luxuriate in, as well as maybe share and invest in others to, facilitate their growth or support future prosperity or further growth. In the third decan of Scorpio, we're dealing more with loss or things which once were but are no more, and we must now salvage what's left or find ways to recycle that which has decayed or ended. And it's often the story in that part of Scorpio is about letting go or not attaching oneself to dead things, to things which can't be or no longer are, or maybe shouldn't be to begin with. But also the power in knowing when to let things go. Or, when a pig dies in the wild, that sucks for the pig, but there are a multitude of species which exist and sustain themselves wholly from devouring the decaying flesh of the pig. In fact, it's a very useful part of the ecosystem. If there weren't bacteria and insects and carrion animals to break down larger dead animals, the world would just be a giant pile of dead animals. Of all the animals that ever died would just be kind of laying around everywhere. So it's this regeneration that happens after loss as well. And then finally, the third decan of Pisces is the decan where we, try to realize a perfected ideal. We identify what we desire or what we find to be truly beautiful or truly worth devoting ourselves to, and we try to give everything to it to realize it in the world. And sometimes we get the result we want, and sometimes we don't. And then we question, was it all worth it? And I think although the visible planets are having a relationship with these slices of the sky that all speak to these very emotional topics, it's hard not to see it as a little bit of a funeral procession for an age which is no more. Maybe for some of us, a final encounter with that age, or a period where we're both personally and collectively reflecting on where everything has led us to. What do we have? What do we still have? What have we lost? How do we salvage it or not let it, rot in our living room and make us sick? And was it all worth it? What did it mean to us? And now that it isn't going to last forever, or that we know that it won't, how do we lay it to rest? Or how do we decide what to commit ourselves to now? And while this is pointing to specific events in maybe our lives, in the world, it speaks to, things that are fundamentally true all the time, which is that all things come to an end. We all come into the world and develop ideas about what we want. We dream of the lives we could have, and then we go off into the world in pursuit of them. And sometimes we succeed in realizing some of those dreams, and sometimes we fail. We fall short of those goals. Sometimes we get the thing we want, and in fact, inevitably always do lose that thing. Under ideal circumstances, we get the thing we want, and we don't lose it, or the thing's existence outlives us, and we don't have to see it go away, because, those things go away too. Nothing lasts forever, right? And what this essentially signals the beginning of is what I think will be an emotional period for a lot of people, where there's maybe a conscious or unconscious acknowledgement that something fundamental has come to an end, or something about their lives or our world is not ever going to be the same as it was. It is past. Sometimes those things that have passed aren't things that ever were, but were dreams or hopes for the future, which some of us are maybe realizing that some of those things can't ever come to pass now. The conditions and circumstances just aren't there anymore. And so we have to figure out how to digest or let go of the dead weight, whether they're old dreams, whether they're old desires, or things we hoped for, things we loved, things that we thought we wanted, or things that we've been doing that are, were never very good for us, that we just needed to drop. We need to let the maggots and insects and carrion birds, have their way with them. So yeah, expect this period of time to maybe feel a little sadder, a little moodier, or people around you to feel sad or kind of moody, or potentially people who are making a killing, digesting the dead things. While I know we don't like to identify or associate ourselves with maggots or the likes of dead flesh eaters, right? We may find ourselves served by changing our relationship with things which have been discarded, or by participating in the breakdown of old dead things. This can look like scrapping, right? What was garbage for one person, what somebody else threw in the trash, there's valuable stuff in there if you take it apart and clean the gunk off of it and are willing to do that, the dirty work, right? And then by doing that, you, instead of letting those materials rot away somewhere, like you're putting them back into the system to be used and to support prosperity, right? And sometimes, when we let things go that we once wanted, we discover later on that there were things within that which are still alive and well. And actually, there's a place for that in my life now. I was really into Pokemon, for example. I wasn't. But if you were really into Pokemon cards as a teenager and your dream was to be a real Pokemon master, right? You really wanted there to be real Pokemon, but there just weren't, just didn't happen. You were hoping that you'd figure out how to engineer some, but it just didn't materialize. And the cards just, didn't do it for you. So, you gave up on the dream, and then you went to school to be an IT specialist. And, maybe that was okay. That was fine. You moved on. But maybe you go up in your attic one day and you rediscover your old Pokemon cards and find out that you have, 50 grand worth of Pokemon cards there just sitting in your attic. And while, you don't get the original wish fulfilled to be a Pokemon master, you do get some money in your pocket. You get something out of it. There's something to be salvaged. And I think that's what this period's about. This is about finding the usable pieces, even when the whole isn't turning out to be all that we hoped and dreamed of. So yeah, on that somber note, we'll wrap up the forecast for today, because I think that covers the main the main thrust of what's happening around the new moon in Libra and leading up to Halloween. Most wonderful time of year. So I will see you guys before Halloween, where we will talk about the full moon in Taurus taking place in early November. And there'll be some other big announcements to make that you'll just have to wait for. And yeah, with that, call it a day. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you made it all the way to the end, deepest thanks. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me talk about astrology. It's what I love, and I'm glad that I've been able to offer that service to people who appreciate it. So thanks again, and if you want to support the channel, if you want to support me in this work, like the video, subscribe, consider joining the Patreon, which is really support only for the most part at this point, but you will get with it a 20% discount on readings. And then you can also book a reading with me at KylePierceAstrologer.com. I offer, natal consultations. I offer synastry readings. I offer planetary remediation readings, where if you have a difficult planet in your birth chart that you want to get better results out of, we can come up with a plan to build a practice focused on improving your relationship with that planet and what it represents in your life and getting better results out of that part of your life. But yeah, thanks again, guys. Ta-ta for now.